Hey everyone, and welcome to this Vassals of Kingsgrave Regal edition of reviewing season 4 of Netflix's lavishly produced show, The Crown. My name is Bina007. You may refer to me as Your Majesty or Your Serene Highness. Take your pick. I will be your host today, and I'm joined by Hannah.
Hey, it's Shadowbaby on the forums.
Alias.
Hey, this is Zack. I am the Duke of Wessex in Crusader Kings 3.
By Jock.
Hello, I'm Jock. All the President's Men is my porn name.
And by Mary.
Hi, Mary, and Nymeria on the Discord, and I'm not going to say a title because I have no imagination.
Okay, so we're going to be discussing The Crown. I would assume there will be spoilers for all 4 seasons, but obviously for season 4. Season 4 of The Crown starts in 1977 and runs to 1990. So that broadly takes in the reign of Margaret Thatcher. It covers topics politically, such as the terrible Republican terrorism that occurred during that period, and also the police response to that. It covers the very nasty recession that the United Kingdom experienced in the early 80s. It covers the UK's war with Argentina over the Falklands Islands. And from a royal perspective, it covers the marital problems of Princess Anne, the marriage and then marital problems of Prince Charles. And we see, obviously, the aging royals, the Queen, Prince Philip, and Princess Margaret. So before we get into the themes and the character arcs of this season, maybe we can all start with our ratings. So what should we designate as our object of ratings? Maybe corgis. How many corgis out of a pack of 5 do you give it? And maybe, I'm not sure how far we did Vox on the previous season, so maybe you can say not only how many corgis out of 5 you give this season, but where you would place it, whether you enjoyed it more or less than previous seasons. So let's start maybe with Alias.
Sure. So for me, I have been watching the show as it's been coming out, and I've enjoyed it a lot. The whole project is really cool to me. Just going throughout history in this manner is really fun. And I think the season was really good, and the material was really good, and it's cool to see these characters where they're at in their life now. I do think there is kind of a concern with the show as it gets closer to actual contemporary reality, where, especially with this Diana stuff, which, just to share some context on like where I'm coming from, like I don't know much about this stuff. I of course know of the popularity of Diana and this material and how important it is to a lot of people, but I think there's a certain concern about like trying to like hit all the greatest hits of stuff that we've seen happen actually in our real lives, and I think that kind of limits the show maybe in some ways. But I still really enjoyed the season, and I'm curious to see how it plays out, that even closer material as it continues. I think there's only going to be one more season if I've heard correctly. But yeah, for this I'll give it 4 out of 5 corgis. It was good. It wasn't my favorite season of them all, but I did enjoy it a lot.
Okay, that's fair. Hannah, how about you?
Well, I'm going to be contrarian, and I'm going to give it 4 out of 5 Balmoral stags instead of corgi.
Very good.
I really enjoyed this one. I think probably more than seasons 2 and 3. So I think I'm going to put it up there with season 1 as far as ranking. They're pretty even for me. The casting this time, that girl, I don't know her, that plays Diana.
Emma Corrin, I think
it's chilling.
Yeah, particularly in voice, it's spooky. It's really spooky.
And she nailed all the mannerisms. I mean, really, and also the kid that plays Charles is dead on. I mean, really well done with all the casting. And the production value has always been fantastic, but I think they just really nailed it and creating the narrative and the look and feel of the time while still being very modern digital photography. Fantastic. So I really enjoyed it. I cleared it in one day, one straight sitting.
I love it. Mary, how about you?
I think I would actually give it 3.5 corgis, if you can cut corgis in half, which you shouldn't do. That's horrific.
No corgis were harmed in the making of this episode, listeners.
Yes, please. I guess I'm more and more uncomfortable with how contemporary it is, as Zack was saying. And how probably it was also not always accurate in the previous seasons, but somehow it struck me more in this season, and I was more uncomfortable with it because the people who lived through this are actually still alive, and I can't help but think what this must be like to watch for the royal princes, for anyone who was involved in this story at the time, and sometimes somehow it's worse than when it was 60 years ago. So like it was really compelling. I was really into it, and I watched it quickly as well, but a bit uncomfortable with it. So I wouldn't exactly say yes, I've enjoyed it, but it's complicated. So in the whole series, I guess I preferred the first seasons just because it was a bit more historic and a bit less about relationships. Basically, it was still, but I guess there were also more historically related episodes, and we haven't had a lot of those in this season. I mean, there's the Falklands War, and there's things with Thatcher, but it's not exactly the same as the historical events that were in the previous seasons.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think this is more soap opera because it has that relationship at the foreground, the Charles Diana relationship. Even the Queen actually isn't necessarily in the foreground of this season, so it is less about the history. Jock, over to you.
Yeah, I'd probably give it about maybe 4 out of 5 stags again. I think it's pretty much all what Millie said. Like, I was mostly watching it for historical stuff, and I'm not as big into the inclusion of the more relationship side of things. That said, like, all the acting was fantastic and productions were all brilliant, and it's very pretty. Like, especially the woman who played Diana, and also Gillian Anderson and Thatcher was pretty great.
Yeah, it has to. I think it's one of the most beautifully put together shows on TV, and I don't know what the budget is per episode, but especially with Diana, all her iconic outfits, recreating them, quite phenomenal. I think I'm with all of you, actually. I think, I'd rate it incredibly highly. I think it was gripping. I watched it in a day and a half. Probably would have binged it all the way through, but my husband would have left me. I'm not being a monarchist. I really enjoyed it. To me, in a sense, it's ghoulish because this is the first season that is my life. So,
Right.
I was in primary school during the royal wedding, and we had to make, very happily, we did little, celebratory stuff for it. And I remember sitting watching both that royal wedding very avidly, and also the wedding of Prince Andrew later in that decade. The British people, quite sadly, have been subjected to the psychodrama of Charles and Diana's marriage. So every twist and turn played out in the tabloids. I feel that a lot of those iconic shots and the interviews, which I'm sure we'll get in the next season, are things we almost know by heart, right? Even that famous Panorama interview. So it was very spooky seeing it, but it's also familiar because I feel that Peter Morgan, who is the showrunner on The Crown, has trod this ground before. He did a play called The Audience, which was about the Queen and her prime ministers. So that a lot of the Thatcher dialogue with the Queen comes from that. Those of us who have seen his film that's basically set in the period after Diana's death will notice a lot of similarity with the stalking at Balmoral and some of the scenes there. So like I'd seen parts of it before. And I did find it okay. It's people that are alive, people that will be king, presumably. The next season has to go to Diana's death, right? I mean, there's not much left otherwise. So what's going on with Princess Anne and Princes Edward and Andrew, and how they dealt with Andrew, given how controversial he is now. And then the other one I thought, then I thought the other sort of more minor topic, but still a very interesting one, was what was going on with Princess Margaret, the Queen Mother. So do you want to do the minor royals first? Should we do the lesser children, the non-inheriting children first?
Sounds good.
So we get Princess Anne, who, as we all know, is Prince Philip's favourite. An Olympic equestrian married to another Olympic equestrian, and wondering whether that's going to be problematic. and evidently in a rather unhappy marriage, which isn't essayed very much. We have Prince Andrew, who by this point is in the armed forces and apparently loving it, a bit of a show off. Not yet getting married, dating Q Stark, who's a soft porn actress, and it's intimated that he's the Queen's favourite. And then we get Prince Edward, who describes an absolutely horrific bullying childhood in school, and all three of them with rather distant relationships to her Madge. Any takes on this trio of apparently, what's the word that Prince Philip uses? They're all lost. The children are all lost. Well, Charles is lost.
I
but
feel
he
like
always has been. But these three are lost too. What do you think?
I feel like the Queen having to like schedule time. She's like, schedule time with my children and give me a dossier on like what they're like just sort of says it all.
The briefing note, yeah, that's, I mean, because you have the latitude to actually have a do-over as a parent, but seems to have spent really not much more time with them than the first two.
Yeah, with Anne, I think she's actually one of the most fun characters in the show. Like, just because, unlike a lot of the characters that are embroiled in the drama, she just kind of is standing away from it. So you just appreciate her snarkiness and just seemingly being more level-headed as she's presented. So she's a great character both in this season and the one before it. But for Andrew and Edward, like, we only see them for like 5 minutes, it feels like. And I think they seem terrible. Like, from how they're presented, they just don't seem like appealing people, and they seem like they're internalizing a lot of the bad things that happen to them in their life, and they're going to take it out on other people, which just, I don't know, it's not very great.
Yeah, but there's a cold, hard cynicism to Edward that I found surprising, insofar as he said, "Oh yes, I'll get into Cambridge University because why wouldn't I? I'm a prince, you know." I found that rather galling.
Remember, our family is no different than anyone else.
I like Anne. First of all, again, just a stunning portrayal. When you watch like side by side of her, it's remarkable. The similarity,
a very good actress.
I love her as a character. I them being the Lessers, and again, I grew up in the era of Sarah Ferguson, the Yorks divorcing and the Waleses divorcing, and then Diana's death. So I don't know much about any of them personally, Edward, Anne, but the way she's portrayed in the show, she just seems like, even though she straight of the crown as everyone else in her family, she's still the most like sober, very shrewd, sure of herself. And if she had only been born first, you know what I mean? Like, and if succession could work that way, she would be much more. She just seems like she's got, the chin for it. And I really liked her.
I think a lot of British monarchists would agree with you. They'd much rather have Anne.
Yeah. I was glad that they didn't completely, because I was curious, are they going to just sidestep Andrew and cancel him totally? So I was a little still like creeped out. Just the whole thing right now is really creepy. But I was glad they didn't try to just cancel and rewrite history, and were bold enough to just, this is what happened then. We're not talking about what's happening now.
But I
don't think they really painted him. And that's the thing, is I don't think they painted him though as this like future creep necessarily. I don't, you know what I mean? I think it was a brief but more or less, I guess, fair depiction. But again, I don't really know him. I do think that it was wrong when at the end they said that he was her favorite, because I thought she would come around to the conclusion I came around. Your favorite child is the monarchy. Your favorite child is England.
I agree.
Clearly. I think they showed something that's interesting to me, that he is already very creepy and damaged, but not much is said about it, and you can still like imagine what he would have been if something had been done at this point. Like he's not a complete psychopath, you could still get something from him, if I don't know if, but it was well done, I think, like not too much and not nothing, and I think they had to address it in a way, and they did leave him in, I think, on purpose. I think it was very, very deliberate.
Yeah, I mean, he came off as sort of like the I don't know, like the chauvinistic playboy. I mean, obviously not like great man of character sort of ideals, but like didn't necessarily come across as the things that we're seeing now. So
Yeah, and funnily enough, I actually knew Princess Anne's daughter, because not new, but knew of her because I'm a horse rider as well. I did horse riding competitions and stuff, and I've watched. It's one of the few sports I watch actually. And her daughter is also a horse rider and a competitor, a professional. So I knew of her before, and I remember going on Wikipedia and be like, okay, who's she in the royal family? But I remembered that like halfway through the season, I was like, oh yeah, right, that name, yes. So this was the nice. I'm with you all. I love Anne the best, probably, but also because of that, I love that.
And she's very popular
her.
too. So Zara Tyndall
Yeah.
is also very popular because she always seems very, very good fun, and she's married a rugby player. They seem very happy. It does rather feel like Princess Anne's children, although the son is now divorced, but very amicably, and they co-parent very well. And it just feels like her two children are very well adjusted. And I think that probably speaks to Princess Anne. I'm not sure she would have raised them particularly warmly, but certainly they seem a lot more well adjusted.
Yeah.
And I think it's fair to say that people in England hold her very fondly. There's a lot more respect toward her than many other of the royal family because she works so hard and she does a lot of the rather unglamorous day in, day out royal duties. So I think Princess Anne, we'd all agree would have been a nice heir to the Queen, but it was not to be. I do wonder though how much in real life and indeed in the show she's the better adjusted of the three lesser children, because she did at least have the love of Prince Philip. That bit where they're she's putting on her coat at Balmoral to go out, and he's like, don't give up on your Olympic career just to appease a guy who's not your equal. I found that quite touching. So she at least had that, I think.
I was also surprised by the
accomplished.
Queen saying that Andrew was her favorite, because she seems like Anne is the only one she wants to actually spend time with in the show. Like, she doesn't seem to want to ever actually interact with any of her other kids unless on an actual formal occasion. But Anne, she actually does stuff with.
I think it comes from the fact that Anne, at least when she divorces her husband, she is kind of part of the household, right? So when she sees her sister and her mother, often you have Anne with them, and I think it's more circumstantial than really something that the Queen specifically wants. But I might be wrong.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that for this period, Andrew is at boarding school, then in the armed forces, so he wouldn't have been around as much. But it is interesting that although they cover the Falklands War, they don't cover his service, because at the time, that was a big part of the tabloid coverage. Brave Prince Andrew off with the troops. So he's definitely been downplayed, and maybe that's a weakness of the writing or a restriction on the writing, because they can't really show him being the Queen's favorite, because they would have to show him more, and they would have to show the Queen's lack of judgment, I guess, and not seeing he was problematic. Because I think there is an implication that because he has always been her favourite and very indulged, that he's probably grown up with a sense of entitlement that he can get away with whatever he wants, and that leads him to where he is today. Still probably entirely confused as to why he's been dumped by the family and what exactly he's done wrong. I don't think he feels any remorse. I don't think he really knows what he's done wrong, which comes from rather royal indulgence, I guess. Anything else on the lesser royals?
is this the obligatory point where we ask if Charles can just be skipped? He could just step aside on this one.
He can step aside, but I don't think he will.
He's like, it'll be my 10 years as king. Like, okay, dude. Just come on.
I think the Queen's going to cling on and just hopefully.
Yeah.
Charles.
He's going to
I've said it before.
coronated at 90.
I say it again.
Yeah,
Life is sidestepping him.
for the good of the realm, Charles. Just you lost this one.
Well, does it actually matter? I'm actually curious about this. Like, how much does it matter who is the monarch now?
Hugely.
Okay.
If you want the monarchy to survive,
right. That's the thing, right? Yeah.
I we'll get to it with the death of Diana in the next season, but the monarchy came very perilously close to not being supported. It exists in this miasma of, it's a very perilous thing to be a monarch. What's interesting is in modern day, I suspect that the Queen is most close to Prince Edward, and because she's very close to his wife, Sophie Wessex. So these things do change. Okay, so that's the storyline of the lesser kids, which is pretty much, I would say, supporting characters this season. And even the marriage of Prince Philip and the Queen, which was a big part of seasons 1 and 2, is very much just taken as read that he's supportive. So the other big royal storyline is that of Princess Margaret, who we've obviously seen in season 1 not being allowed to marry Group Captain Peter Townsend, and then we've seen her make in season 2 the disastrous marriage to the utter cunt of a husband that she married, Tony Armstrong Jones, who just treated her abominably. And then I guess in season 3 she just goes off the rails with drink and drugs. And I guess we see her meet Roddy Llewellyn last season or this season, but effectively she's just older and alone, and they've portrayed her in this season as being very sad, very lonely, perhaps the only one who truly understands the predicament that Charles, Camilla and Diana are in. So from that perspective, rather sympathetically. And she has an episode wherein she discovers that she has some cousins on her maternal side who are very harshly put in a residential care home for people with severe mental disability, and that they were locked out of sight because if there was seen as being hereditary disease, it could have damaged the claim to the throne of her and her sister. So she gets an episode where she's seen as having incredibly progressive views as regards people who have disability, and in a very sympathetic light. How did you all find Princess Margaret this season?
Love her. And I don't really care for Helena Bonham Carter that much, but she's nailing it. She's
good in
nailing it.
this.
Yeah, she's really dynamic and very sympathetic while being tough and ballsy. And I don't know that much about Margaret as a person, but if she's like that, it makes me really admire her in many ways, you know.
I do think she kind of gets pushed to the side this season, and that's kind of a thematic point, right? As we get in that episode you're describing, we learn that she is not part of like the high HRH or whatever, the people that actually get to do things. I don't know the actual mechanics of it, but we see her getting pushed to the side, and we see her kind of discovering this hidden terrible secret about her family and its mental health struggles that she's dealing with. And I think that all is good. Most part in most of the episodes, I think she is kind of just a background character, frankly, for a lot of the time. She does get some moment in the Balmoral Test episode where she's talking to Thatcher and she's like talking about Queen Victoria's chair and telling her all the things that she should do. Great interaction that she gets there.
Yeah, I mean, I love Helena Bonham Carter as Princess Margaret, and I love this fictional Princess Margaret, and probably differently able people, but also the entire countries at that point, and even up until Princess Margaret was anything like that, anything like as sympathetic. I think she was incredibly thwarted, a very good person actually. And I think by the time we get in smoking herself into an early grave, and I don't think she would have had anything like the kind of, it's a brilliant read, which talks about her, it totally recast my view of her romance with the group captain, because it points out he knew her from 13 and was clearly, she was in love with him from 16 and stuff was probably going on. And at the time he was like in his mid-30s, and that he then, having not married her, went on to marry a show jumper who was even younger than him than her, and just had this sort of reputation for going after 14-year-old women or young girls who look good on horseback. So Craig Brown almost alleges that she was groomed by him and exploited by him and never got over it, and that she had a very sad life. But she was definitely very elitist and definitely very high-handed and very arrogant. So I'd strongly recommend that book. I think this portrayal is the furthest from the truth, actually. I really do. I think it smacks of Peter Morgan trying to make a point about how the royal family treated its disabled relatives, rather than anything truthful about Princess Margaret.
Right, she's just kind of used as the vehicle to explore that, and it's not necessarily accurate to use that.
Yeah, I think so. But I think there's a deep truth about people who start close to the crown and get spun out. And I think that's a lot of what's happening with Harry and why Harry's left, because I think he's the Princess Margaret, right? You start off as the sibling of a king and you're very important and in the limelight. And as your brother gets married and has kids, suddenly you're now sort of fifth, sixth in line to the throne and getting further and further away. And I think he's going through some of that himself. So I think it's interesting from that perspective. Anything else on Princess Margaret?
Yeah, can I so this phrase, friend of Dorothy, is that an insult?
Sorry, asking me?
Well, just in England, the only other time I've heard it is from the IT crowd when they go to the theater and they have a song that's like, I'm a friend of Dorothy, he's a friend of Dorothy too. Like, it's really great, but
I don't think it's so much as an insult is incredibly antiquated. I don't think anyone's used that as a veiled term for someone being gay since probably 1976.
I had never heard it outside the IT crowd, so I didn't understand it in the IT crowd. I mean, the whole episode is hysterical. I just thought it was some song. And then I heard, when Olivia Colman's like, well, friend of Dorothy, and then I realized, oh, that's, saying, like over here, we'd say lighten the loafers, but it's kind of an insult. It's an effeminate, it's, lumping all gays into that effeminate.
I think it was more back.
Extra.
I think it stems from the days when being homosexual, or certainly homosexual acts, were illegal in this country. So you had to, it was just a euphemism for saying someone's gay without saying it. I don't think anyone's used it in the last 20 years, though. I'd be amazed. But yeah,
just curious. It is a cultural idiom.
I would
I'm not
find it
familiar
insulting with. Now if someone used it, just because I think just say someone's gay. I mean, there's no need to dance around it. There's nothing wrong with it. It's perfectly legal. Just why would you need the fact of using euphemisms almost suggests there's something to hide or something to be ashamed of. So I guess all euphemisms I would find slightly offensive now. But yeah, any other Princess Margaret comments?
Well, just that I loved her in the show. I understand what you're saying, Bina, about how it's probably not very accurate of who she was. But I think she also, it's like the whole point of the show and the whole point of this season particularly is to show how damaging being a royal is and how damaging the royal family is. Like, they don't take very good care of each other. At least in the way it's portrayed. And I think Princess Margaret is just also a good way to show that. Like, it's.
I completely agree.
Like, I think yes, her personality might not be accurate, but what happens to her is, and how bitter it drives her is still true. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're completely right. I think the dramatic license is really well used and beautifully done, I think. And I think Helena Bonham Carter is very moving in it. And even Prince Philip says the same, doesn't he, when he says to Diana, look, we're all alone, because the only person who isn't alone is the person at the centre. We're all just, whirling around the Queen and the crown.
And to be honest, she's quite alone as well, I think.
Yeah.
She might be even more alone than all the others.
The difference is, I mean, I guess this is a real life comment, is I think the Queen, the actual Queen, has immense faith, and I think that is her. I think that keeps her going. So I think she's alone at the centre, but she genuinely believes she's put there by God and she's on a mission. So I think that I don't think she would feel alone in that sense. And also, she at least had the man that she was in love with by her side the whole time, which is a big difference. Okay, yeah. So let's move ourselves. Let's move ourselves slowly to the centre of the solar system that is the monarchy. Arguably closer to her than most others, because at least she gets a weekly meeting. We have Margaret Thatcher. So herself an icon, highly controversial, I would say. I think she stokes huge emotion, pro and con, even to this day in England. So I will tread carefully in what I say, and I will state for the record that my father and I are probably the last Thatcherites in England when all else fails. So I definitely am on one side of this argument. I've been known to refer to Margaret Thatcher as Blessed Margaret.
Oh, so you love this then?
I love Margaret Thatcher. I think she transformed this country, and she gave people like my father, who were, first generation immigrants, an environment in which to thrive, which obviously benefited me. But I'm very aware that, there are two sides to this argument, and that the Crown has chosen to show another side, which is equally valid, I suppose. I mean, I will grudgingly say that. Other opinions may vary. So I'm gonna tread lightly, answer questions on historical facts, and let you guys do the discussion. So as we see the Crown portray it, Margaret Thatcher is a lower middle class woman whose father was an alderman. She has scraped herself up to be the first female prime minister. She is fighting against her own party, which is full of very aristocratic, misogynistic men. She's fighting against a country that in the 1970s, as we've seen in the previous season, was riven by oil shocks, was in penury, went to the IMF for a bailout, so we were effectively bankrupt. And she wants to transform the country, and she wants to do so by sheer hard work, apparently. And she's incredibly, at the start of the season, in awe of the monarchy. She's a monarchist, she believes in the monarchy, but as she gets a closer look, is maybe appalled by what she sees, and vice versa. I think the Queen, per the Crown's reading, is appalled by what she perceives to be a lack of feeling that Margaret Thatcher is pursuing policies that make her very hated and are very divisive, and that she doesn't like that. So that's probably a summary of how that arc goes. And by the end of the decade, we see Margaret Thatcher ousted from power by her cabinet. And I will leave my thoughts of that to the end of the programme, because I find it almost painful to discuss. I've never forgiven those.
Did she really get the medal from the Queen? Like when she?
Yes, she did.
Yeah,
she did.
Interesting.
I will say, she was made a baroness as well. So most people, when they retire as prime ministers, Baroness Thatcher, she died. So anyway, what do you all make of Margaret Thatcher and the Queen, and what in particular do you make of Gillian Anderson's portrayal, and also of Dennis Thatcher, her husband? Because that's quite a funny one as well. But anyway, yeah.
I feel like the whole season opens up with being like, oh, two women leading the country is not what we need. And that's like kind of the tone. It's very much confrontational. It seems like it paints her as someone who never really had any support, although I know that's not true. She obviously had a hard time, but she made it work, forced her way in. So, I think
that is an interesting point. I think the show sort of skips over the moment where her popular support seems to rise, which is with the Falklands War. Like, it doesn't really... I mean, it kind of shows it, but it doesn't really demonstrate that shift in like a holistic way, at least among some people. So yeah, it was kind of hard to track how she was being perceived by the pop, and we don't really get to see that in general in this show, because we rarely get to insight into actual human people that aren't part of the royal family. But yeah, it was really hard to tell like what the public perception of her was in the context of the show.
Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't get from the show that she won the biggest landslide victory in British electoral history since World War II in the election after the Falklands War. She was hugely popular after the victory in the Falklands War, hugely popular. And it was her moment of triumph, right? Because she was, running around on the world stage with Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev and, achieved many great things. I mean, what I think, if I were to defend Peter Morgan, I would say this isn't a show about Thatcher, right? So he only needs to show her in reference to the Crown. So he chooses not to show that stuff. I think Gillian Anderson's portrayal is really good, but I think she shows Thatcher almost too weary and too hoarse from the start. I think you don't get the youthful energy. Like the first time she goes to Balmoral, actually Thatcher was younger and had much more energy and spoke differently, spoke in a much higher pitched tone. And the Anderson that you get is very good for the broken Thatcher who's been stabbed in the back by her cabinet. She's perfect for that. But I think it starts off too weary.
It's so deeply memeable, like the 10-second curtsy and the "Your Majesty." It's like so slow and deliberate.
This is like really unpopular opinion. Everyone's been guffawing over Gillian Anderson's portrayal here, and don't get me wrong, I love Gillian Anderson. She, no offense, but Gillian Anderson's natural speaking voice is actually a lot more close to Margaret Thatcher.
I agree. Just
than this voice she put on. And
she needed
to be taken down like 10 notches. It was so distracting to me the whole time. It was like so forced, and I don't know why she was allowed to continue to do that, because Margaret Thatcher does have like this deeper, slightly raspy voice, but like you said, when she doesn't speak slowly, and it's Gillian Anderson tried to like lower her voice, and in order to do that couldn't keep her breath to pace her dialogue.
And also Margaret Thatcher didn't do that. She was specifically told, when she was deeply unpopular and had no authority in the run up to the Falklands War, she was advised, you need to lower your voice and speak more like a man. When men hear you, they hear a screeching housewife.
I do think they play her with a lot of like internalized misogyny. Like that's a note they hit really hard. Did you think that was accurate to the time, like that it was appropriate to make that such an emphasis?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I don't think Margaret Thatcher would have ever sat with the Queen and say, no, I'm not going to have women in my cabinet, they're incompetent. I just think Margaret Thatcher came from that era of women, and perhaps I'm one of them, where you just think, well, just get on with it and do it. Like, I don't need to deliberately pick half my cabinet as women. If there's competent women, I'll select them. So was she an internalized misogynist? Probably. We probably all are from that era. Would she have articulated it in that way? I really seriously doubt it. But she didn't have a lot of women in her cabinet. Then again, no one else did. I mean, did Ronald Reagan have a lot of women in his cabinet? No. There weren't a lot of women MPs to select from. So, you know, it's a charge that's thrown against her, but I'm not entirely sure what she could have done about it, to be honest. She inspired a lot of women to enter politics, both to be like her and to be against her. And so you get this marvellous crop of women starting to come into British politics in the early 1990s. And I think that's very much her legacy. But I would say that, wouldn't I? Because I think she's amazing.
So I'm not going to weigh in on what I feel like politically with any of this, but as far as the show goes, I will say I think they did a great job with juxtaposing the Falklands War and the guy that breaks into Buckingham. And, you know, this is an era that many people often refer to, you know, the Thatcher years. We survived the Thatcher years. In the TV show Shameless, Frank Gallagher is often like wants to blame everything on Margaret Thatcher as this lower class person. So we have this person who's maybe a little unstable, not getting answers that he wants, deeply affected by economic turndown. And they juxtapose that with this victory parade. So how much money is now spent on this showing of triumph when you have people like this guy losing his house, losing his kids? And I'm not weighing in on whether that's right or wrong, but everything I've ever seen when people reference it, generations since, it seems to be in keeping with that sentiment from things that
I
I've
think
seen.
It's very well done. Yeah, I think you're right, Hannah. And I think, even for people like me who think the policies were needed and right, you have to acknowledge there was a huge human cost to it. And people in old dying industries such as shipbuilding and mining who just didn't work again. And they were written up, they were just long-term unemployed, and it was devastating socially. And I think using the Michael Fagan story, which is almost like kind of like a funny story. I remember that guy managed to climb over the wall of Buckingham Palace and get in. To use it in a really kind of poignant way, I think was good. And in this show that's got so much lavish luxury, to show the scene when he's in the unemployment office queuing up for his unemployment check, especially in a time of pandemic, right, when lots of people have been laid off and are in that circumstance right now, I thought was really right and clever and well done. Similarly, if you think about the two sets of people that Margaret Thatcher went to war on, right, the Argentinians aren't even in the top two. The first one is the unions, hence the recession and the unemployment story. But the second was the IRA. So to show republicanism and the terrorism and the death of Lord Mountbatten, again, you can argue whether she was right or wrong in the tactics she used, because she was incredibly hard line. I think she was right, evidently. But to show the wages of that, I think was very right. Because it was a huge, growing up, even as a young kid, it was a hugely divisive time to be in this country. It was really, really unpleasant. It was horrific. It makes the post-GFC look like nothing. And I think it's right.
See, I didn't know about any of this, like really as far as, British history, like that kind of just that period of unrest there, and especially with, unemployment. And I mean, I didn't know about the assassination. I was extremely surprised when the boat blew up. Yes. I had to immediately go to Google, like, did this actually happen? What's happening?
Gosh.
I was just sort of like waiting for it, like before it dragged on a bit, like waiting up for the assassination.
Yeah, come on, get on with it.
I can't believe that Tywin got caught with his pants down like that. So
Actually,
they just skipped over Pan Am Flight 103.
Yeah, but that wasn't big for the Crown as such, right?
That was the bombing, right?
I don't think that had nothing to do with her, though, and especially like everything with apartheid. I don't think it can be safely assumed it had absolutely nothing to
I mean, in a way, the
you
IRA
know.
terrorism story is kind of a weird one because evidently the IRA never actually went after the Queen because even they recognised that would have been a step too far and would have lost them all their political capital. It might have been interesting to explore that more. That you can go for Dickie Mountbatten, you can go for Margaret Thatcher because they had a go on her in Brighton and nearly came very close to succeeding, but you can't have a go at the Queen.
Again, I'm in this mostly for the historical events, so I was kind of disappointed that there was no follow-up on that in the next episodes. I don't think it's mentioned really, but it's also because of how big the jumps are between the episodes. But I have the bad habit of Googling people while I'm watching. So I was Googling Lord Mountbatten again when I during the episode, the first one, and then I got to the line where that said he was assassinated in the and so when the scene arrived, I just knew because it was obvious when you knew. I was a bit disappointed with myself.
About Prince Margaret's like chain smoking right when that episode started with her coughing.
Yeah.
It was like weirdly aligned with that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
On Thatcher, if I may, because I didn't. Well, from a French point of view, I think the public opinion on Thatcher was probably very opposed to her. Probably. I think I can remember my father. I mean, I wasn't born. I wasn't alive then. But I can remember my father years later when I was a kid, still like commenting on her or just comparing her to someone else on the far right here and being like that's not good. So I'm very much a socialist. I'm very much of the opinion that the state should help its less fortunate citizens.
You'd hate her.
Yeah, and the show made me hate her clearly. But one thing specifically that I didn't like about the show in her portrayal is when they basically imply that she really wasn't wasn't on the top of her game when the Falklands War started.
That's bollocks, isn't it?
And that's not true. And I hate that because if you think a woman made a mistake or didn't make the right decision, that's on her. That's not on the fact that she was being emotional because her son
it's
was
actually
missing.
Hugely misogynistic because her son wasn't missing at that time.
Yes, exactly.
And it's a very misogynistic thing, right? To say, oh, but she was a mum and she was worried about her
Yes,
boobs.
it's trying to excuse her in some sense from that decision that you can agree with or disagree with. That's not even the point. It's just it's putting that decision and the way she acted at the beginning of the war on that, and that's not even true. Like it would already be disturbing if it was true, but it's not. So I really didn't like that specific part. I get that they wanted to portray to depict both events, but I think it was very wrong to show the one as the consequence of the other.
Yeah, no, I completely agree.
Yeah, also with the pageant, the Highland Games, when she started the acting with her cabinet shuffles, like say what you want about Thatcher, everything she did was deliberate. Like she was a brilliant politician who focused on everything she could do to further her ideology, but everything she did was planned out.
Yeah. And the other thing I would say about Thatcher and the Queen is that I would say, and I wouldn't say, I mean, like, for instance, you can contrast Thatcher with Boris Johnson, and you can say of Margaret Thatcher, a bit like the Queen, they can make decisions you don't agree with or do things that you think are unfeeling and lacking in empathy. But I honestly believe that for both women, they did so for what they thought was the best thing for the country as a whole, and that they had no other choice. If it was a hard choice, they didn't have an easier one, and that they were both motivated by really sort of earnest desire for the public good and motivated by faith, I think, for both women. And I don't think that's true of, politicians on either side, but I don't think David Cameron or Boris Johnson really gave a shit about the public good. I don't think Tony Blair particularly did. I mean, these are all judgments you can make. But I think Margaret Thatcher made very, very unpopular choices. But I genuinely think they were quite earnest. And I didn't like the idea of her being portrayed as someone who just did stuff because her son had a business in South Africa or because her son was missing. It was just all very trivial.
Did it really happen with like the Queen like leaking a story, or is that like sort of like people allege that's maybe what happened? Like, was there a story at the time that was like the Queen's upset with Thatcher?
Not really, no, not that I remember. But I mean, it was the whole issue of apartheid in South Africa and whether we should boycott them. And in particular, I don't know if you guys remember the story of Zola Budd, who was a South African runner who wanted to race in the LA Olympics, and whether she should race for us as a country. It was hugely controversial. I remember being incredibly aware of this as like a 7-8-year-old in school, because none of us were going to buy South African fruit. I mean, it was a huge thing. It was like the Black Lives Matter of our time. And yeah, it was a huge issue. But I don't remember the Queen in particular leaking. I mean, my impression of the Queen is she's always been very careful to hide her feelings. I think she wasn't a fan of Margaret Thatcher, but I think she wasn't a fan of Margaret Thatcher because Margaret Thatcher was clearly a social climber and put on airs. I mean, Margaret Thatcher got very grand by the end of her prime ministership. And I think the Queen probably didn't like that very much. I mean, she acted as though she were the Queen in some respects. So
I will say one moment that I think does give her a positive side is it's more so actually giving the monarchy a negative side, is the Balmoral test, where we see just how elitist they are about everything. And like there's these details that they're like testing her on, and they're so ridiculous and unnecessary. I think that is a moment where that comes across.
Although the Queen's the only person who's nice. So when they walk in black tie, she's like, right, that's okay, we'll do dinner in half an hour.
And they're all like, what the hell's wrong with these people?
Yeah.
It's so ridiculous.
Even their party games are like the peak of snobbery.
But I just thought, for Margaret Thatcher, who, grew up with no money, no opportunity to somehow win a place at Oxford to study chemistry, a woman who's kind of got herself to the height of power just through sheer intellect and stubbornness. And you finally meet the Queen, who's your hero, and you just get to play Ibble Dibble. I mean, what fucking 3-year-old chicanery is this? I think it's the Queen. It's when she falls out of love with the monarchy, I think.
She thought she would come like dressed for the regalia, and they're like, we're just gonna go trekking through the mud.
Yeah, but I don't think she's the only one. If you read the memoirs of Tony and Cherie Blair, they're quite funny on how ludicrous they thought the whole monarchy thing was. And
Nice.
Cherie Blair just didn't want to curtsy because she was, as my husband is, an anti-monarchist, a Republican.
Have you seen the way they're eating pudding?
I know.
That particular scene, though, or like when she's at Balmoral, I think does do a good job of showing how. So even when you're like in and invited in, with Rule can't get it right. She's over. Not that they're. The Queen does adjust. Okay, well, we'll do dinner later. Go ahead and change. And tries not to make her feel shitty about it, but just the awkwardness of you just can't do it right unless you've been trained yourself.
And yet Diana passes the test and still fails the marriage, right? Segue alert. Let's talk about Camilla, let's talk about Charles, and let's talk about Diana. Maybe should we do them one by one? So let's talk about Camilla first. What did you all think about Camilla Parker Bowles, the future Queen of England, no less? Thoughts, feelings?
Is she really going to be queen, or is that going to be her title? Or I thought wouldn't.
I thought something said she could never actually be queen, but I don't know.
I mean, technically she'll be queen. It's just they'll call her
consort or something.
Yeah, they'll call her like Duchess of whatever. But she will be queen. I mean, she'll have all the precedence.
She won't be like the princess instead of the queen, or
you'll have to curtsy, motherfuckers. I mean,
yes, but you won't have.
I remember reading something when it might have been when Harry got married or the other one, but like something about like, oh yeah, like she'll never actually have the title. Like it was just, it was just some blurb. I don't know anything about any of that.
She will forego it out of embarrassment, right? But I mean, she could have it. I mean, she's entitled to it.
I think I read that since she had been divorced.
Well, so's the king.
Yes,
so's Jock.
But
100 years ago, they would have been like, "So you're just going to have to give everything up And now
I'm
we're kind of
pretty
like,
really
well,
sure that I read something, but it doesn't really matter anyway. What do we think about her?
What do you think about
it's
her?
all
What
neither
do you
here
think
nor
about
there
what
because
do
the
you all think
queen
about the dinner
is going to
when she takes
outlive
Diana
them.
out and basically flaunts the fact that she's got a nickname for
Jeez.
Charles and she knows all his habits?
Rough stuff right there.
yeah.
Oh,
I've never gotten a
Did you
good
see the
impression
thing
from her
where
from anything.
in production they had him sitting there in between them?
huh?
He was on set and they had him the guy that plays Charles was sitting in between them while they filmed that scene.
Oh goodness, the ghost of
Why?
Prince Charles.
What was the reasoning?
They to really put them in the mindset of, you know, having this conversation and also not having this conversation, and really to nail home in their performance that they're in this tug of war for him. So
You
he's
can really
off
tell this was
camera
made
on the
by
other side of the table.
you can really
So
tell
they're
this was
actually
made by a guy who made plays and stuff. They did stuff like that.
they're like looking at him. Like sometimes in the scene, if you go back and watch, they'll look up, and so the actor is really there, present on the day. And so there are a few times when they'll say something catty, and then Diana will kind of her eyes go up, and
Wow.
she's really looking at the actor.
Gosh, I need
I
to see
don't-
that footage now.
Yeah, I don't really get why, but okay. I think part of me liked her because she was way more realistic than Charles was, and just more mature. Like he's really mature in this season, or this is portrayed that way. And she was not. And what I found interesting was really the point that Anne makes at some point, that she might be your your only love, but you're not hers.
Well, exactly.
When Anne says that to Charles, and I thought that was a very interesting and nuanced way to see the whole situation, because it's not. You could be tempted to think about it like they loved each other and they couldn't marry, and it's all tragic, and it's like a fairy tale. But it's not really. It's way more realistic than that. And
it's not that
like
they
that.
couldn't marry. I mean, Charles could have married her. The problem is Charles dilly-dallied. She was already, flirting with her husband to be and thought he was the better one, so she married him.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think Anne was spot on. But bear in mind, Anne was shagging Camilla's husband before they were married too, so she knew something of him. But I think it's right, and I think Camilla, the one bit where I did sympathise with her is I thought she was a bit like Wallace Simpson, insofar as neither Wallace nor Camilla Parker Bowles wanted to be anything other than the mistress. They knew that if their respective princes had divorced or, given up the throne for them and married them, that they would be the most unpopular women in England. So she's very practical. She knows that she can't compete with Diana. Diana's very popular. And I actually feel very sorry for Camilla, because I think Camilla, the last sort of 10 to 15 years has been a very hardworking member of the royal family and done a lot of good, but she'll always be the other woman. She'll always be the woman that, Diana accuses of breaking her heart. So there's no way she ever escapes it. And I kind of feel a little bit sorry for her for that. But
honestly, I feel sorry for the three of them.
it's just shit. Yeah, I mean, it's just a crap situation all round, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, I'll put it this way: I feel sorry for Diana
feel-
first, then Camilla, and Charles third. But I do feel sorry for all.
I feel most sorry for Harry and William. And I do wonder, like, if Camilla had not been in the picture, would Diana be alive today? If Camilla had married Charles, would Diana be alive today? Would she have been the humanitarian
If Camilla had
she
married
was?
Charles, Diana would definitely be alive, because she wouldn't have been hounded by paparazzi. Whether she would have been happy, I don't know, because I think she was very, and I don't mean this pejoratively, I just think she was a broken bird, and we'll get there when we talk about Diana. But okay, should we move from Camilla to the depiction of Charles this season, the future king of England?
I hated him, and that's even surprising, because I remember really feeling sorry for him in the previous season, and actually liking him, or at least liking, he was just going through some difficult stuff and being in a really difficult position all the time, and kind of a likable person who's trying to do right, but he really doesn't want to. But in this season, the way they portrayed him was really, really terrible. I mean, it made me hate him, which might not be entirely justified. I don't know, but
boys, stick up for your fellow bro. Come on, what's the defense of Charles?
That's what's interesting about how the show portrays Charles, right? Because in season 3, they give him this episode, the Wales episode, where like he is so amazing and perfect in that episode. Like they go way over the top to show how great he is in that one. And then slowly but surely over the course of this season, to the point where we get to the Avalanche episode, where he is just the worst. Like it's just like a slow de-evolution to the point where he is just like the worst character in the show. So it's interesting how they gave him like that huge highlight back in season 3 and then just kind of chipped away at it over time till where we are now.
I wonder if they'll raise him back up again in season 4 with the death of Diana. Whether that, you know, in the same way that he's been rehabilitated in British public opinion since then. We shall see. The devil's advocate case for Charles is we have seen him in The Crown be abandoned by his mum for foreign tours, be sent to a school, Gordonston, which is horrific, with a father who clearly expresses very openly that he thinks is a total fucking waste of space. He is a man desperately in search for love. And I think when he first meets the shy Diana, maybe, and she's sympathetic with him at the polo when Dickie Mountbatten's died or been murdered, he probably thinks, yes, this is the woman who can provide me with love. And I think as much as he's reluctant to go ahead with the wedding, there is the potential chance for success. And I do wonder if Diana had been less young and pretty and charismatic and less taken by the crowds, whether the marriage would have survived, whether Charles's ego and his need for love, whether that marriage would survive if Diana had just been maybe a bit like Sarah Ferguson and just not seen as pretty and fat shamed and not loved by the tabloids. Maybe Charles would have loved her more. But he needs a lot of ego stroking. His ego is so fragile. And I actually felt sorry for Camilla. I thought it must be wearying being with someone that needy. I mean, that must be horrible being with him.
He's absolutely terrible, and that's the key theme, right? Is that feeling of jealousy that he has, and it is. I mean, I can, to some extent, like I can understand at least being stunned by the sheer overwhelming popularity that Diana had. Like having to reckon with that as someone who's been given everything in your entire life, to some extent, and like having to see like this person become like an icon and totally overshadow you. I can see how that would eat away at you to some extent, but he is just awful, and he has no good impulses about it at all.
Especially as a man of that generation who's been raised to think you are the one. You're going to be the crown. So he's seen his mummy her whole life just be the center of everything. And he thinks every pain I've endured, every bullying moment I've endured, every hurt will be made whole when I am the center of the world. And he thinks, fuck, even when I inherit, it's Diana who's going to be at the center and I'm going to be like Prince Philip on the periphery. I mean, that must be quite a psychological shock. I'm not sure. I think it's easy to judge it, but who of us would survive that? I think it takes a lot, right? It takes a lot to stand 2 paces behind your wife for your whole life. And Prince Philip, we see struggle with it in seasons 1 and 2, but he gets there. But Prince Charles, if you've been raised to be king and then to be told, yeah, you're basically going to be the person 2 steps behind Diana, picking up the flower bouquets that people give her, and have people moaning because they wish she was on their side of the walking tour. Am I convincing anyone? Any sympathy coming? No?
Oh, I'm definitely sympathetic, and I definitely understand where he comes from. It's just, I think the way the show portrays him as really the one who broke Diana, and like, at least in the way they show it, he's very unfair to her. Like, she, at least for part of it, she's trying to love him and to give him what he needs. And it's like, nope, you're overshadowing me, and he's all paranoid and stuff. So I do sympathize, and I understand, but just grow up as well. It's just the way
grow up.
I think.
He's 40 by the end of the season. Like, you'd think he'd be a little more mature about this. Exactly,
and the way, I don't know if that's even a tiny bit accurate, but the way you see him scheme, like being like, okay, the first thing she does, I'm divorcing her, and basically doing everything he can so that this can happen. That's really just not a high point.
No, No, he's not nice. And actually, the bit that really shocked me was more, I was saying to my mum that, Diana just felt so alone. Like, where was her mum? Where was her dad? Like, the one thing about Kate Middleton when she married William is she had this, like, very close mum and dad and brothers and sisters. And at least she had support. And I feel, even for Meghan Markle, I feel she didn't have that support. Like, she just had her mum. Like, I think if you marry into the royals, you really need a secure home base to kind of prop you up. And, Diana just has basically this grandma who instructs her in etiquette and is very critical and is on the side of the royals, not on Diana's side. She has no one to turn to. Like, the mum's fucked off, the dad's a horror show. I mean, she is a broken bird from a very nasty family with no sense of love there. And the royal courtier says to the queen, don't you want to instruct her and help her? She's going to be the next queen. And the queen's like, no, I can't be bothered, let her granny do it. And it's so mean. I just think she's so alone. I really felt sorry for her as a young girl.
The way the queen treats her is really awful too. I'm not really, like, what is going on there? Like, why does she feel that way about her?
Just shut up and get on with it. I think that was the attitude in that era, right?
It is. It does reflect, though, what Hannah was saying earlier. I think this notion that, like, she just doesn't have time for her family in the way she does for the people. Like, that is really her true love, is not anyone in her family necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, she's more sympathetic to the guy who breaks into her bedroom.
Yeah, way more.
Yeah, really.
But the bit when Diana just clings to her as mummy and clings around her neck, and the queen is obviously aghast. And you just think, even if the marriage itself wasn't successful, like the Indian, in a ruthless way, wouldn't the queen have wanted to give Diana a hug, or just so that the future king is raised in a settled environment?
But she's just not like that. I think the queen, it's funny because I don't have a whole lot of sympathy for people that you don't have maybe
for the wealthy. I mean, typically, if let's say you're in the 1% or whatever, you have means. It means you have freedom. I mean, you may be miserable still, and you may not be happy, whatever. But you have freedom. You have choice. You don't have someone telling you where to go and when to do it and how to look. Most of those people. I mean, you have a public image to keep. If you're an actor or a billionaire or whatever. But for the most part, you can be eccentric, you can be weird, you can do whatever you want. But not in the monarchy. So
she's probably, though, like, Philip wasn't happy. Philip was a royal in his own right, had it not been for World War II, but like, he sucked it up and made his peace with it and learned his role. So she's probably looking at Anna.
I almost think a generational thing. Yeah, I think it's a generational thing. I think that wartime generation who went through World War II, and even if you were queen, that was really petrifying, and you worked hard and you didn't eat. And I see it in my Philip, my husband Philip's father, who was a child during World War II and grew up through rationing. That they just swallow down feelings. They don't talk about feelings. They don't complain. They just keep calm and carry on and get on with it. And it's a very, very dangerous trait of that generation of British people, which is shut up, don't complain, don't share, don't parent in showing hugs.
Yeah,
and,
she might resent
tactile.
Diana for that too, that she takes the baby to Australia.
Yeah, but I think she just doesn't understand it. I think it's just a complete communication failure, because Diana's not just one generation down like Charles, she's almost 2 generations down. And I think the Crown shows that very well with, she wants to listen to Duran Duran and go to a disco. Like, she's a tote whereas to go to the opera. So I think it's not even the monarchy. I think it's just that generation maybe. But I do feel for Diana, because I think she was just so young. And I mean, I really don't like Diana in the 90s. I think she became very manipulative, and I didn't like her at all when she died. But not that I would wish her to be dead, but I thought she became a very odd person. But in the 80s, I think Diana is supremely sympathetic. This broken bird sent alone into this broken family, given fuck all support. Pump out 2 kids, you've done your job, now shut up and sit down. What a life.
Yeah, I think you can explain why the Queen behaves this way and why the family just doesn't understand Diana. But I think what seems terrible to me is that they should have realized way earlier. Like, I can understand and I can allow that generation to behave this way, but I would have hoped that they would be at least a little bit aware of it, and that the choice of bride for Charles would have taken that into account. And I'm sure there were women that would have that would have
jumped at the chance.
Yes,
it's also portrayed they were just so happy for him to connect with anyone and push him away from Camilla because they're like, that's not an option for you.
Yeah. Okay, so Bina, you'll probably know more about this. But what I read was that it wasn't by chance that he met Diana. They kind of chose her for him.
Well, it wasn't they. It was the Queen Mother and Diana's grandma were best friends. I think Lady Fermoy was lady in waiting at some point to the Queen Mother, maybe even to the Queen. And the idea was that her eldest daughter would be set up with Sarah Spencer. And they dated and got on really well, and probably would have been a far better match because they were just, the age gap was smaller. They were far more similar. Yeah. And then she got tricked by some tabloid journalists and blabbed to them. Like, she talked about the and said she was sure she'd be engaged. Charles just dumped her immediately for speaking to the press. And that caused the problem. So then they had to go to Diana, who was by far younger and really not suitable and had been really fucked up by her own parents' divorce. And I mean, if for people who think Diana's lovely, read how she treated her stepmother, because Diana did some pretty fucking callous stuff to her and vice versa. So it was very much a setup. And the idea was the person who married Prince Charles had to be A, aristocratic, and B, a virgin. And so you were going to have a huge age gap, and you were going to have someone who was very sexually and emotionally immature, because you were, of necessity, if you're going for a virgin, going to pick someone who's very, very young and very inexperienced, hasn't had a real relationship.
Fudge the second one. Who knows?
Yeah, well, she sadly they didn't. And I think Diana was, when we say that Camilla's love of her life was Tom Parker Bowles, Charles's love of his life was Camilla Parker Bowles, I genuinely truly believe Diana's love of her life was Charles. Yeah. And the tragedy is that the fairy tale, I think she thought she was having a fairy tale marriage until she didn't.
They go from saying like she's perfect in the Balmoral test, right? Like, she's the one, she's perfect, and then just close ranks around Charles the second anything goes tits up, and I just think that adds to, at least for the viewer, it's meant to add to the absurdity and the double standards that the royals have among their own, and I guess that's true of any family, maybe, at least perhaps back then. I have a cousin right now going through a divorce, but he's the fuck up. He has ruined his wife's life, and she's like, I don't want you to pick sides, and I'm going, you don't have to. I already know what side I'm on. I'll always love my cousin, but he's fucking up, and there's no justification for that.
What I find amazing is that Philip, who, let's be honest, probably had his own dalliances, just didn't sit Charles down and say, look, you're fucking up your marriage. Stop seeing Camilla Parker Bowles and pay some attention to your poor wife. And it doesn't feel like any of that happened. I don't know. Poor Diana.
And again, I just feel the most sorry for William and Harry. The children are always the ones that are the most unfairly treated when you have horrible. They were very young and they had a lot of, trauma. And any child, no matter if they're rich or poor, that goes through something like that, I have sympathy for.
That's true. And I think the only good news is I think certainly William is in a good marriage. I think he's fine. And I think Harry will see whether his marriage lasts. But I don't know if he's fine. I think he's the one we'll find out whether he is fine or not. But
they seem fairly well adjusted, though. And their dad has become a better presence in their life, I think, which is nice. At least it seems like ultimately they'll have their own happy endings, whatever that looks like.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, I think it's going to be interesting as we get into the next season how they deal with Diana and her affairs and everything that happened around the death.
Where do you guys predict the show will end? I heard there's only going to be one more season.
Yeah, because they have to only have one more season, right? Because they can't get into what they're going to do. William falling in love with Kate at university.
No. There's nothing interesting, and also it's too close to home, I think, right?
I think even doing the death is a little bit close to home.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, I think originally they had said they'd planned to have 3 different casts, right? Like for each era.
The cast again, they'll be switching the Queen and all that again.
Well, they're
next
switching
season,
Diana, which I think is horrific because I really love Diana. Yeah,
switching. I don't think they need to for age reasons.
She's not that much older. Yeah, you just put on the shoulder pads.
Just a bigger name, isn't it? I mean, she's a bigger name actress, but I think this actress now has become such a big name that feels kind of silly.
I agree.
Yeah, I wouldn't do that if I were them. I think my guess is they'll take it right up to where the movie The Queen sort of begins. So they'll
Oh, so
go
to
with
before the death. Okay.
yeah, I think they might take it right up to that line. The Yorks maybe would be a big part of it. Margaret passing, maybe. Well, she lived beyond that, didn't she?
Yeah, no, because she was the one who hated the fact that Diana got a state funeral. She stood on precedent. She wasn't the nice person of the crown. She absolutely was livid that Diana got a state funeral because she was not an HRH when she died.
So I guess maybe there'll be more of the same with the triangle, Camilla, Charles, Diana, and more of the IRA stuff.
Windsor burning down, the divorce of Andrew. And apart from the death of Diana, nothing really happens to the royals between the death of Diana and then William marrying Kate. It's pretty, there's not much in between.
What do you guys? They will go up to the death. I don't think they can avoid it, really.
I think they have to do the death. I think that has to.
I agree.
Yeah. So they're going to leave Charles looking at his absolute worst. One of the things that I learned in reading this biography of Princess Margaret is that they talk in depth about the funeral arrangements of Diana and Hannah. The one thing I really agree with you is I have such sympathy for William and Harry being forced to walk the funeral cortege.
Oh, geez, yeah.
And they really didn't want to. And the only reason they did is because Charles was so afraid that if he walked it, he would get booed and things thrown at him. So he thought if he walked it with his children, that the crowd wouldn't do that. And I thought, you're using your fucking children as a human shield.
Well, and I'm the same age as Harry and pretty close in age to William. So I think I've grown up. I feel like I've grown up with them, you know what I mean? And so I tend to have a little more sympathy to them because I do remember the night that Diana died and that news breaking and being upset. And then I remember watching the funeral live on TV and looking at these boys, particularly Harry's the exact same age as I am. I think he's a couple months my senior. And just, really feeling, if that were my mom.
God, what a nightmare.
Just
yeah,
my heart going out to him. Royal or not royal, that's a horrific thing to experience at such a young age. And so suddenly, it's not like she had an illness where they could sort of prepare and say goodbye. I
think William and
really
Harry
tragic.
had, because of that, huge amounts of goodwill from the British public. And I think William kind of retains it to this day. I think Harry basically in a course of 18 months has just pissed it away to nothing, which is very, very sad. But let's see what happens with him. Anyone want to say anything about any particular actors, actresses, any other aspect of the crown that we haven't yet discussed?
I was going to say, Tobias Mackenzie is a treasure. Olivia Colman can do no wrong in my eyes. Like, she's just amazing. I love her.
Yeah, I was going to mention Tobias Menzies as Philip. I think he really nails that role.
He's phenomenal as Philip. Actually, one of the things I really was sad about is in real life, Philip remained quite close to Diana, like after the Balmoral test or for whatever reason. Like he was quite fond of her. And I think maybe Philip just got on better with girl daughters, maybe. Like he got on well with Anne. And there's all this correspondence, very little of which has been published, where he would write her letters. Like she would write to him almost like a grandpa asking for advice on the marriage. And he would write back and say, I know Charles can be a bit difficult and it's really weird being married to, a monarch or a future monarch, but this is what I would try and do. And even after the divorce, he really tried to be encouraging and kind of take her under his wing a little bit. And it was a shame to me that we didn't see more of them after that Balmoral episode, because I thought as actors, they were very sweet together.
I get the moment at the end, but yeah.
Yes, but same, I agree. And I think overall, I was just a bit disappointed to not see Philip more, basically, because we really don't have much from him in the whole season. His relationship with the Queen is basically like done in a way that they just don't talk about it anymore. It seems both stable and almost indifferent. Not really, but well, not exactly. Like they seem settled, but also very alone. Like
and not in love. Like I get the impression, even from the pictures that were released this week for Prince Philip's birthday, that he looks like a walking skeleton, his soul. But like when the Queen looks at him and he looks at her, you get the impression, a bit like my parents actually in their frail dotage, they still love each other, And
I didn't get that in this season.
No, I agree.
Which I found a bit disappointing.
I did think the bit after the break-in where he was just like, You could tell how steamed he was. He's like, I wasn't there. And I mean, that's about all we got, really. They didn't focus on that relationship, but I still felt it there.
Well,
they had
that moment
little...
where, is that open door, was that an invitation? And she's like, not that kind of invitation. And I've been married for quite a while now, and you do kind of settle into things where, not that there's no sex or anything, but it's not like this huge priority for anyone. You're getting older, but you have companionship. And I do think they did a good job at portraying that element to the relationship and bringing it forward, again, to juxtapose it to the past seasons, I think.
I think there wasn't enough companionship. Like, I would have wanted a bit more.
I thought there was a decent amount for me. Like, there's just enough. The problem is they don't get a lot of focus in this season in general, but I thought the moments they had together were all really good in that respect.
Yeah, but they're few and far between. I agree.
Yeah. And that, I guess they're just a victim of the fact that the focus, for the first time ever in The Crown, the Queen is not the focus of the season. It is Charles and Diana, and I guess that's the reason.
It's part of why I like the earlier seasons more, because I think it feels nicer to have that freedom of like an earlier historical moment, but also just I think these are the characters that I'm most engaged with, so to see them kind of pushed to the side is kind of unfortunate.
Yeah, I would really agree with that. I'm very nervous for next season, actually. Very nervous for doing the death. And all
let's
the
hope they don't
interviews
pull a Game of Thrones and ruin it in the 11th hour.
Yeah.
One thing I would like them to do is maybe an after show or something, is like just have a talk about these things and why they made the decisions that they made, and what was accurate and not, and why they chose to change stuff. It's just, I think transparency and openness would be really, really first really good, and just also interesting to see how they themselves felt about the way they were portraying things.
Yeah, and actually there's precedent for this, because there's it's not a French drama, but it's a drama, or maybe it's a French produced drama about Versailles, but it's in English with English actors. But what was really interesting about that is because obviously when it was shown in England, the people producing it probably were aware that British historical education is so kind of focused on Britain. We know a lot about British history, but we have a terrible understanding of other people's history, which is a problem. But anyway, so what they would do is the 9 o'clock on the Sunday night prestige slot, they would show the hour episode of Versailles, and then they would have an hour-long program with really preeminent historians discussing what was true and what wasn't true and what really happened, and showing famous artworks and architecture and giving it context, which I used to love, because you'd get all the kind of the cheap thrills of the bonking and the adultery and Versailles, and then you'd really learn something. And they could so clearly do that with The Crown. Netflix has so much money, they could clearly do like a companion documentary series that after that they would dump with that and say season 1, let's talk about the IRA in the 80s or whatever.
Exactly, because the reason they're only doing one more season is a choice, because they feel like it's too contemporary afterwards. It's not because of the money, so they can do that. I was actually thinking, I didn't know they did that with Versailles, and that's interesting. I was thinking of Chernobyl, where you had these 1 hour podcasts for each episode, which I really loved, and I thought were almost as interesting and compelling as the show itself. I think that would be a really interesting thing to watch.
Maybe Vox should do that. No, but I mean, seriously, I think HBO have really, because they did that also with Watchmen, where they do the kind of the accompanying podcast. It's so good. And like you say, they talk to the writers, you talk about the choices. Craig Mazin on Chernobyl was very clear on what was and wasn't real and why he had to change it or not. I'd love for Netflix to do that. But Netflix, they have done some podcasts. I remember when The Irishman was released through Netflix, they did a podcast series with that. And in each episode, they did like the editor or the costume designer. And they did get into what was the history of Jimmy Hoffa and what was known, what wasn't known, and the choices that were made. So there is precedent, but they've obviously decided not to. And I guess the answer for that is maybe because with Chernobyl or Jimmy Hoffa, they're a fact. But with The Crown, what are you going to say? Like, because all of it's supposition, isn't it? Like, what did Charles really feel in this moment?
Yeah, you're just guessing, basically. Yeah.
But they could clear up, like, when Margaret Thatcher's son was missing, I guess.
Exactly, because that's historical fact. That's just months before the beginning of the Falkland War. And they could also just, it doesn't have to be long, but acknowledge that it's that it is supposition, that it is what they imagine happened for a lot of it. Just acknowledging that would be already a good thing.
How do you guys feel about Peter Morgan casting his partner as Mrs. Thatcher? Nepotism or justified because she's a great actress?
Huh.
Didn't know that.
I didn't know either.
they've been going out since 2016.
But it's like, what's his name? Tim Burton used to cast Helena Bonham Carter in like everything.
I'm going to say that being, Hannah probably knows things about that as well, but being myself in the music industry now, I can see how it very much works like that. And it's not necessarily a good thing, but it's not necessarily a bad thing either, because a lot of it is about how you connect with the people you work with. Like in music, you can argue that you do better music when there's a real connection between the people doing it together. That's not true for every group, but I always feel like there's something more when the people singing together or playing together are very obviously all very good friends.
I agree.
So and also when you trust someone, it's a different way of working, and I get why it happens, but it's also often weird to hear like, oh yeah, so this guy will now direct be the director of that opera house, and that's fine because he knew him, and it's always men, by the way, in this kind of situation. So that's an issue. And in that case, I didn't know that it was that they were together. And I didn't say that earlier, but I agree with you guys that her portrayal of Thatcher, without myself having any idea of what Thatcher sounds like, was a bit too much and forced. So maybe it wasn't the best choice in the end.
Or maybe it could have been the best choice, but a director who wasn't afraid of getting mad when he got home would have given her the note to take it down a little bit. Whereas a director who have to go home with a woman and hear about it all weekend is like,
Look, I am happy to have someone choose scenery in a performance like this and say, you know what, my choice is to really just dig in. And a good actor can do that in a way that's over the top and ridiculous, but also still real, if that makes any sense. And it's just fun.
That's the thing for me. It was just really fun. Like some of my favorite moments of the show was just like Thatcher just chewing the scene so hard.
I mean, I loved it. I mean, honestly, like, even though like some people have said it's a very like, I think Kevin was saying that he thought it was quite a left-wing portrayal and very unflattering to her, which I agree with, but the nostalgia was so big. I mean, my dad and I were like WhatsApping each other saying we're getting high off the fumes of seeing Blessed Margaret on screen again.
Am I the only one that kind of thought Thatcher came out okay in all this? Like, I mean, like they had moments. Like I said, they didn't really show her having any support, but I don't know. They also kind of like, she was the Iron Lady. She was I don't know. It seemed like they made her a very admirable character for the show.
I don't think they maybe went into some of the stuff that some of her critics would maybe call her out on more thoroughly.
Right.
Anything else on the Crown, boys and girls? Will you watch the next season, or will you give it a miss because it's going to take in Diana and the death?
I'll watch it, but yeah, it's going to be.
Yeah, I'll watch. Those are the events I remember the most.
Yeah,
I will watch.
I gotta run, guys.
Goodbye,
Dina,
England's
thanks
Rose,
for hosting.
You're welcome.
I love you all.
Love you.
Thanks, Hannah.
Bye, everyone.
Goodbye.
Thanks, Dina. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.